Can I say it? Just once?
Only if you wish to suffer.
Get over here!
This melody has been familiar to us since childhood, and we know the characters, their legends, and tricks by heart. The Mortal Kombat series is over 30 years old and has 11 full-fledged parts, more than 15 off-series parts and add-ons, 3 full-length adaptations, 2 animated films, 3 series, and a lot of various related products in the form of toys, comics, as well as the book, the music album, and the card games, sold in millions of copies. But all this could not have happened if it weren't for one person who came up with the idea many decades ago and still gets enthusiastic about it. Furthermore, the new first part of Mortal Kombat has come in time. In the light of the game's large-scale reboot, we will turn back to a couple of decades ago. Let's remember how it all began, look at the people who were behind the creation of the first games, and tell in detail the story of the formation of the immortal and invincible Mortal Kombat series. This is the first part of our immersion. You are watching PressX. Get comfortable, we're getting started.
Round 1. Fight!
Chicago, 1999. Most recently, Williams Electronic Games, known for making pinball tables and arcade machines, acquired Bally Midway. Back in the late 70s, this company became famous thanks to the successful distribution of the Japanese game Space Invaders in the United States. Then, the programmer and game designer Edward John Boon, better known as simply Ed Boon, worked at Bally Midway for about 15 years. Boon, now known as a talented video game developer, voice actor, and director, was then a regular computer programmer with a bachelor degree in mathematics and computer science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And as a diligent employee of Bally Midway, just after the merger with Williams Company, Boon went to work in the pinball department, working on about 20 pinball games over the next 2 years. Because of this, at the time, he was called Mortal Master, which basically can already be considered the first bell for his future creation. When Williams relocated its subsidiary's headquarters to Chicago, Ed Boon moved into the electronic entertainment division and was engaged in the technical process and programming of arcade video games. After moving to Chicago, Edward managed to work on the creation of 2 games, High Impact Football and Super High Impact, and also had the opportunity to voice the character General Akboob in another game, Total Carnage. However, it was while working on the latter that Edward met the guys who were involved in the development of Total Carnage, John Tobias and Tony Goski. It was during this period in 1991 that Bally Midway bought the rights to the electronic entertainment department from the parent company and absorbed it, becoming Midway Games as a result. It looks a little strange, as if one creature swallowed another and now controls it from the inside, but business is a complicated thing. It's better not to go deep into it because it'll take too much time. In short, Midway in the 90s will finally absorb the Williams home console division, and the latter will no longer feature in this story, while Midway will be flourishing until 2008. So in 1991, Boon and the company noticed the success of the Japanese game Street Fighter II: The World Warrior from Capcom Studio, and wanted to make their own analog for the American market. They wanted to make the kind of arcade fighting game that could compete with a Japanese one. Boon got support from John Tobias and presented the leadership a game concept with mechanics from the arcade fighting game Karate Champ, only with large digital versions of various characters. They were given a year and $1 million to develop the Street Fighter Killer. By that time, John Tobias had long nurtured the idea of a themed ninja fighting game and even had some sketches. He drew inspiration from Chinese and Japanese mythology and folklore, as well as some of the stories and rumors about Shaolin monks. Well, of course, movies about Oriental martial arts as well as Bruce Lee's films had a huge influence on his idea. Drawing inspiration for the game's story and characters, Tobias also used another movie, Big Trouble in Little China. Kind of Americanized my obsession for supernatural kung fu films from China. It was not my biggest influence. My biggest influences came from Sui Hark Films, Zoo Warriors, and The Swordsman. We had to get them from bootleggers in Chicago's Chinatown, the developer wrote. It's safe to say that Tobias was a real fan of martial arts and Asian culture. For example, in Chicago, he bought Lee Hee-sing's China's Ninja Connection, where he read a story about an ancient clan of thieves and assassins, the Lin Kuei. who had their own hierarchy and competed with another Japanese ninja clan. And already based on this story, the developers created several of his sketches with characters and their brief biographies, using the name Lin Kuei. He created 2 characters. One of them deserted and fled from the clan, and the second was sent to find him. You probably already know who these characters are. Midway management didn't want to see a ninja fighting game and focused on the game based on the film Universal Soldier released in that period, and were even willing to pay a decent amount of money to Jean-Claude Van Damme to use his image in the game. Considering that in the 90s Van Damme was a legend like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, everything was making sense. The game could actually be commercially successful. However, at that time the actor was busy working on another game that never came out, and he could not become part of the Universal Soldier game. Perhaps this saved the Mortal Kombat series by giving it a chance to be born. However, Jean-Claude Van Damme would still appear in the Mortal Kombat story in the future. In the meantime, actor and true fan of the Mortal Kombat series, Richard DeVizio, who ended up starring in all the classic games in the series and playing many playable characters, including his beloved Quan Chi, still convinced Tobias to return to the idea of ninjas. The project had several working names: Dragon Attack, Fatality, Mortal Strike, and even Kumite. For a while, Dragon Attack was the main idea and even a logo sketch was developed, but none of the options suited the whole team, and then John Tobias drew his own vision of the logo, and it caught on. At the same time, work on the title reached its climax and appeared in the familiar Mortal Kombat. There are 2 versions of its appearance. The short one says that the team liked this name when it was spelled correctly with a C, Mortal Kombat, but during the trademark registration, it turned out that the name was already taken. And then the team decided not to bother and just replace C with K. The second version claimed that someone wrote the word combat on the blackboard in the office, specifically replacing C with K to make it look more original and brutal. And Boon's colleague in pinball games, Steve Ritchie, suggested naming the game Mortal Kombat. By the way, he had nothing to do with the team working on the fighting game. In general, either someone in the team did not know English or, as often happens, someone turned out to be the first. Almost the same problem appeared while registering the game Biohazard in the USA, due to the fact that there was already this. The game had to be released under the name Resident Evil, now familiar to the world. If you're interested to know the full story of the legendary survival horror series creation, click on the link in the upper right corner of the video or go to our channel. There you can find a series of videos dedicated to all parts and remakes of Resident Evil. And we continue.
Round 2. Fight!
Only 4 people were involved in the development of Mortal Kombat in 1991, and we already know 2. Ed Boon, who was in charge of programming, controlled everything, and put it together technically, and John Tobias, in charge of art and story. The other members of the team were John Vogel, who helped Tobias with story and visuals, and Dan Forden, who was responsible for sound design. Fun fact: the guy who appears in the bottom corner of the screen with the sound "toasty" in the game is Dan Forden. It was the development team who came up with such an Easter egg with him.
My name's Dan Forden and I do sounds and music. And toasty!
Initially, this idea did not belong to him, and basically he did not like it, but later Ed Boon told him that they would add this sound to the game with his face appearing from below at a certain point, and he loved this Easter egg. He recalled,
It's one of those taunts that I used to taunt Ed when we were playing Super High Impact. You know, when the two football sides are coming to the line of scrimmage, I'd say, "Hi, I predict toast." Like, you're toast, right? And somehow that turned into "I predict toasty," and then it just became toasty. And then someone else in the studio suggested, "You should put some of that weird stuff you say into the games." And we're like, "Nah, it's a bad idea." And we're like,
by that time, Capcom has released their acclaimed Street Fighter II: The World Warrior, and it became very popular. And since the idea of a Universal Soldier game didn't pan out, Midway Games let the team take over the development of their own arcade ninja fighting game. A big plus for the game and the team was the decision to invite real actors and stuntmen to draw realistic character models. This decision has become a distinctive feature of the game compared to Street Fighter. Besides the graphics, there were other differences in the games as mechanics. In both games, the essence was the same, to take one character and beat another, but the defense in the games was built differently, and the user of Street Fighter, out of habit, could easily miss a fatality in the face in Mortal Kombat. If in Street Fighter the attack's blocking was based on pressing the back button, in Mortal Kombat the defense was moved to another button. Japanese fighting games often, and to this day, offer the user a block when the character retreats back. But in Mortal Kombat, this has been the game's distinctive feature since the days of the arcade machines. There were 5 buttons on the arcade 1-Up Midway Legacy Edition, 2 for punching, 2 for kicking, upper and lower. The central one was responsible for the block, and with a joystick the player could choose the movement in 8 directions. At the same time, the developers came up with an innovation for Mortal Kombat: chip damage. Compared to other fighting games here, when the player blocked an attack, he still received damage, though the damage was much lighter and, for example, did not allow the enemy to successfully perform a combination. The player had to use the joystick to perform special moves like indicate circular directions and then attack in Street Fighter. If you take Street Fighter 6, for example, looking at the combination of techniques, you will see that for the combination you need to press forward, down, diagonally down, plus a punch. This principle of building an attack has been in the game since the days of arcade machines. Today, many people play with the buttons rather than the joystick, but combinations still require directional joystick scrolling. Mortal Kombat wanted to give up on this, so they came up with the idea of just pushing the joystick without turning it. If you want to perform a special technique, you intermittently press back, forward, plus a hand punch, or forward, 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 plus a punch.
Oh, wow!
Thus, the player did not have to turn the joystick in one direction or another quickly, but could quickly change the attack direction, indicate the attack direction diagonally with one click, and at the same time, block the enemy's attack at any time. Even visually, the list of commands in Mortal Kombat on an arcade machine looked simpler than in Street Fighter. Well, the biggest difference between the Midway Games game and the Capcom game was the blood and profuse cruelty. Characters could perform fatalities, a special finishing off of the enemy with its inherent dominance and cruelty, and later, brutality and animality were added to them, but more on that next time. Initially, this was not the developer's goal. In an interview, Boon admitted that while working on Kombat, they thought about introducing a system of regular stuns and short ones like in Street Fighter. Ed Boon admitted that he hated that mechanic, but the idea of immobilizing the enemy for a while seemed absolutely logical to him. So in Street Fighter, the player could stun the opponent in the middle of the round, and Boon left stuns in Mortal Kombat for the final round, for the winner, allowing him to deal with the enemy with particular cruelty. He even had a sword with which he was supposed to execute the loser, but as a result he never took it out. During development, the team decided to give the players the opportunity to brutally finish off their enemy. This made it much more fun to play. This was made very clear by the focus group that tested the game, and as for Shang Tsung's finishing routine, it was eventually reworked and passed to Johnny Cage. It's funny, but for the player, the abundance of some crazy cruelty at the end of the round was a surprise. He could find out about this either by accidentally pressing the combination, holding down all the keys at once, or by seeing how the computer performs the fatality if you lose to it. This surprise may not be called an Easter egg, but for the players of 1992, it was a secret that everyone was eager to uncover and unravel the button combination. The developers knew that this would draw more attention to the game and deliberately kept the fatalities a secret. As for the game characters, it was Johnny Cage who became the first developed game character and became a kind of promo for the game, since his image was located on the Midway arcade machine itself. Why exactly him and not some Scorpio? It is worth mentioning Jean-Claude Van Damme again here. The fact is that the character of Johnny Cage was heavily inspired by the Hollywood actor, depicted as a skilled martial artist who has a striking resemblance to the real-life star. Yes, Van Damme was not in the game, but there was a character that looked 90% like Van Damme on the arcade machine. And one of Cage's signature moves, introduced in Mortal Kombat 1, was to do the splits and hit the opponent in the groin. It was a maneuver memorably performed by Van Damme in Bloodsport. He was supposed to be Johnny Cage. We took images of Bloodsport and talked about digitalized graphics and how it's going to be Van Damme in the game. At some point he passed, but we later inquired, maybe a couple of times as recently as like Mortal Kombat 9, if he wanted to be in a skin of the game. For some reason, it just never came through. Ed Boon. The idea behind Mortal Kombat was already in development before the developers talked to Van Damme, and when he refused, they just moved forward, John Tobias said in an interview. Cage was simply played by martial artist Daniel Pesina in the early Mortal Kombat installments and by Lyndon Ashby in the 1995 Mortal Kombat film adaptation. But the game developers did not forget that they wanted to involve the martial artist and movie legend into their project, which Boon admitted. As a result, in the announcement of the new Mortal Kombat 1, which will be a complete reboot with new incarnations of classic characters that are not related to the storylines of previous games, it has become known that Jean-Claude Van Damme is joining the series. A teaser has been released for the new game that gives a glimpse of some of the fighters that will be in the game, but Johnny Cage is missing. The fact is that the Van Damme's cage skin will be included in addition to the game combat pack included in Mortal Kombat 1 Premium Edition. Thus, Van Damme's appearance in Mortal Kombat 1 will close a certain loop in the history of the series. But we will talk about this in more detail in the next parts of the video. So subscribe to our channel and click on the bell if you don't want to miss anything. By the way, the actor was invited to star in the film adaptation of the game in 1995. However, he chose to star in the film based on Street Fighter, which, according to him, he regretted. But let's go back to the rest of the characters and the plot of Mortal Kombat. After all, Mortal Kombat's success is based not only on graphics and copious brutality, but an often overlooked fact that keeps people coming back for more: its storyline, its unique gameplay, and the combat system within. Yeah, in 30 years, the plots in games have reached a completely new level, and comparing the plot of a game in 1992 and 2023 is stupid and does not make sense at all. But let's try to plunge into the past and feel like participants of those times who had no other gaming experience and did not know what awaited the gaming sphere in the future. Let's look at the concept John Tobias created.
Round 3. Fight.
The hero named Minamoto Yoshitsune, who later became Liu Kang, was supposed to stop the villain, and although the first version of the name was based on the history of Japan, it was still long and difficult to play. Therefore, the character was given the Chinese version of origin. The daughter of Shang Lao, named Kitsune, was supposed to help him to achieve his goal. She would also be rethought over time, turning into Kitana, but that one would appear only in the sequel. The character should have fallen in love, which would have turned her against her father. Furthermore, the character should have had an assistant, a kind of Sancho Panza, whom Tobias called Michael Grimm in his developments. As a result, they wanted to entrust him to Van Damme, later turning him into Johnny Cage. In the meantime, there was a separate storyline based on the story of two ninjas, Scorpio and Sub-Zero, originally named Tundra, a mysterious character with ice abilities. You probably know that in the 9th part of the game, the name Tundra will be given to Sub-Zero's younger brother. Perhaps the only character that has not changed from the initial stage throughout the game development is Kano, but his opponent, Sonya Blade, appeared in the game at the very was inspired by martial artist Cynthia Rothrock, who was a Special Forces military officer. She replaced Jax, who was called Curtis Stryker during development. He owned the storyline of chasing Kano and trapping him on Shang Tsung's island. The character was recast as Sonya Blade's SWAT operative commander, Jax, and added to Mortal Kombat 2, becoming the first character created for the game. By the way, Stryker would also appear, but just in the 3rd part, having nothing to do with the story, but as a new character with an old, previously unused name. Goro, on the other hand, appeared on its basis in the form of a half-human, half-dragon with 4 arms and a tail at the initial concept stage. As a result, the guy lost his tail. And in all this crazy house of diverse personalities started a story that over the years would become a full-fledged universe. A 2,000-year-old. Only with time, a prequel comic from John Tobias came out where he was the author of the story and a full-fledged artist. Still, before working on the game, he thought about becoming a comic book artist, so his dream came true. Then, with the comic release, the game was ported to home and portable consoles SNES, Genesis, Game Boy, and Game Gear. And in the game, there was a mention of a comic book that players could order for as little as $3 to learn more about the game's story. By the mid-1994s, the comic would be in production and would be sold in every state, and getting a copy outside of the United States was almost impossible. Today, fans consider it partially inconsistent with the canon, as far as the word canon is applicable to the MK series given the constant story rewriting, hello MK1, because the subsequent game continuations were telling a slightly different story. But back in 1992, while the 2nd, 3rd, and other parts of the game had not yet come out, we could have been guided only by the comics. And this Mortal Kombat Collector's Edition Midway's comic book tells the backstory of Shang Tsung, the Great Kung Lao, and Goro, whose victory in Mortal Kombat meant a new dark era for the tournament. Several hundred years ago, the god-cursed warrior Shang Tsung fought in the Shaolin tournament and powerful. This lasted until the appearance of Kung Lao, known today as the Great Kung Lao. Having defeated Shang Tsung, the monk became the champion of the tournament, but years later, Shang Tsung returned incredibly aged and weak. He returned to take the honorable place as one of the Grand Tournament Masters who mysteriously disappeared. And along with him, Shang Tsung brought a former student, Goro. It was Goro who had to fight for the weakened old man and help him appease the gods. Goro defeated Kung Lao, and after that, Shang Tsung remained the immortal Grand Tournament Master for a long time, and it hadn't concerned the takeover of the Earth Kingdom yet. So far, Shang Tsung and the story writers had had enough control over the tournament. The conflict was whether he or the White Lotus Society would manage the tournament. After the backstory and the present, he is the White Lotus's last hope for victory. After 2 weeks in Hong Kong, he boards a ship that will take him to the tournament island. On the ship, he also sees actor Johnny Cage is unaware of the ghost of his nemesis, the Scorpion, lurking on the ship, attacking him from behind. Scorpion wants to avenge his death and to kill Sub-Zero in the same way that Sub-Zero killed him exactly 2 years ago. Some demons allowed Scorpio to return to the world of the living to take revenge. However, he states that he is no ordinary assassin, and instead of killing Sub-Zero on the ship, he pledges to do so in the tournament. Sub-Zero says that Scorpion is a fool for choosing to save his life, and to be honest, this Eastern philosophy and wisdom sometimes raises questions from ordinary people. Like, you can finish off your enemy now and achieve the desired result, but instead you decide to chat with him, tell a joke, give him another chance to fight you, etc., in order to lose with a high probability? What for? It is also worth noting that since there are only 7 main characters in the story, plus Goro as the tournament champion, holding such a tournament seems illogical. The tournament grid looks ridiculous and it is basically impossible, but it has been in the comic book reliable at that time that another 50 unnamed fighters also participate in the tournament besides the main characters we know. The most unusual fighter personality invited by Shang Tsung was the god of thunder, Raiden. In the mountains of rural Japan in a storm, Shang Tsung challenged him to take part in a competition. Raiden accepted the challenge, humiliating the Elder and guaranteeing death to all his opponents. Shang Tsung recalled that the tournament would be held in his domain and under his rule. It is worth noting that Raiden in the first part and Raiden in subsequent games in the series are 2 completely different characters. In the first part, the hero was not yet the defender of the earth, but on the contrary did not like mortals. Well, having accepted the rules of Shang Tsung's game, he was forced to lose part of his strength and turn into a human form. Soon, all the fighters finally arrive on the island. There, after a day of practice and training, Shang Tsung and Goro greet the tournament participants and introduce the final competitor, Sonya Blade, who is the only character from the first part of the game whose fatality does not kill the enemy, but simply delivers a powerful kick. According to the plot, he is a monk and probably his worldview does not allow him to kill the enemy. In future parts, this rule will be rewritten, but even in the 1995 film, Raiden, Sub-Zero, and Scorpion joined forces to hold off the guards. Sonya and Kano fought Goro together on the bridge, a fairly famous and iconic location in the Mortal Kombat series. And when Shang Tsung lost and the island began to collapse, Raiden undertook to save Johnny Cage. He moved Cage further out to sea where he will be found. In the end, Scorpion decided to seize the moment and take revenge on Sub-Zero, and the Ghost challenged him to a fight, in which he won and killed Sub-Zero. The bridge where Sonya and Goro and moved him to the outside world, and along with him, Sonya and Kano were falling into the portal, which will make them prisoners in the second part of the game. How exactly Liu Kang survived is not known for certain, but probably no one even cares. If he survives, then okay, it's the game of the early 90s. Come on.
Round 4. Fight!
And since we mentioned the iconic location with the bridge, why not talk about the rest of the locations in the game? There were 7 of them in total, and they were inspired by movies. The first location is the Palace Gate, with the arena located directly in front of the entrance to Shang Tsung's fortress. Here, the player could notice a small Easter egg. A very small one. Some runes were carved on the wall behind the player on the right, among which was the familiar symbol of Pac-Man. It's also funny that the Buddha statue in the background was digitalized from a real decoration from the garden of one of the developer's neighbors. The second location is the rather famous Courtyard, because we've repeatedly met it in different parts of the game, and in general, it is very recognizable. It was the one which was inspired by the 1973 film Enter the Dragon. In theory, this was the main venue for the tournament. Shang Tsung and the Shaolin monks sat in the arena and watched the sparring in their own interests. Shang Tsung was looking forward to Goro's victory, and the monks, of course, were interested in his defeat. The third location is the Temple of the Warrior. It was a temple dedicated to the participants of the 10th tournament, but despite its iconic character, the location did not really fit into the story since the developers initially came up with a beautiful location with statues of fighters, and then developed and supplemented the plot with a comic book. Because of this, there appeared to be inconsistencies, such as the fact that Sonya was not going to participate in the tournament and did not even know about it, though her statue was standing in the arena. The next location is the Pit, the bridge located over the abyss with spikes, which we have already talked about earlier. According to legend, Shang Tsung made this place as the most dangerous arena on the island, where the loser would surely fall down from the bridge and not survive. Officially, this is the first location in the game where you can perform a stage fatality, a fatality associated with the arena. Only in the first version of the game, finishing off was not counted as a fatality and the player simply saw a special fighter's death. At the bottom of the pit, there were the heads of the developers impaled on spikes. It's a rather interesting Easter egg. By the way, the bottom of the pit will also become an arena for a secret battle with a reptile. And now you ask, who the hell is a reptile? Indeed, in the first version of the game on the arcade machine, there was no reptile, and he appeared not even in the second, but in the third version of the arcade machine, made from shit and sticks. It was a green ninja with the moves of Scorpion and Sub-Zero. At the same time, initially the list of his movements had been loaded in random order. It wasn't until the games released on home consoles like the Super Nintendo where this secret character got his own name. To fight the reptile, it was necessary to fulfill a number of conditions in the pit arena. Firstly, not to use a block, and secondly, one of the silhouettes had to fly past the full moon. Thirdly, the player had to take no damage. And the last, it was necessary to perform a fatality. And only then was it possible to get to the bottom of the pit and fight with the reptile. It is interesting that Sonya Blade had a block button in the fatality combination, so it was impossible for her to meet all the conditions and she could not fight the reptile. This was fixed only by the fourth revision of the arcade game version. Players have been wondering for a long time whether there are still secret characters in the game and how to unlock them. This is where even the rumors started about the existence of the character named Ermac, the red scorpion, which appeared instead of the yellow one. Many so truly believed in its existence that the developers would even meet users halfway and added later. The reptile, according to the plot, is Shang Tsung's personal bodyguard forced to serve the old sorcerer in Shao Kahn. However, this legend would appear and acquire details only over time, and in the first part of the game he was nobody and nothing was known about him. No biography whatsoever. But we'll talk about the reptile in the next video. By the way, the inconsistency with the statue of Sonya Blade was nevertheless taken into account in the restart, and in the 9th part of the game, the location Temple of the Warrior was removed. We will talk about this later, so subscribe to our channel and click on the bell button. This will help us in development, and you won't miss the story continuation of the Mortal Kombat creation. The next location was the throne room, i.e. the main place in the palace of Shang Tsung. Actually, that's why he sat in the center of the hall and watched how the player frantically pressed the keys trying to make a combination. But those dragons next to his throne were digitalized from a real figurine that stood in the office of the head of the Midway Company. Vogel saw it, liked it, and decided to add it to Shang Tsung's location. I wonder if the head of Midway also sucked the souls out of its subordinates. But the developers did not bypass Goro either. He received his own location, Goro's lair, where the final battles take place. That location, like the previous one, Throne Room, was inspired by the scenes of the throne and the cave from the movie Big Trouble in Little China. This cave would appear more than once in the following parts of the series, and since we have talked about all the characters of the first part of the game, we can also talk about the people behind them. As we said, the game character sprites were based on real people. For example, Liu Kang, a former member of the White Lotus Society, was played by Korean-American film actor, stuntman, and martial artist Ho Sung-pak. He is generally quite an outstanding personality, and is also a stunt choreographer in action films, as well as a writer and producer. He played Liu Kang in the second part of the game, but what's more interesting is that he played an older version of Shang Tsung. Park, along with the other actors from the first two Mortal Kombat games, refused to appear in Mortal Kombat 3 due to a royalty dispute with Midway over the use of their likeness in the various console versions of the first two games. This led to the selection of new actors for some of the characters. By the way, Shang Tsung was actually performed by two actors. The second was Eric Kincaid, but for some reason only Ho Sung-pak was listed in the credits. The prototype of Shang Tsung was the main villain from the movie Enter the Dragon. Meanwhile, it is impossible not to mention who Liu Kang's character looked like all this time. With a high probability, the developers were referring to the legendary Bruce Lee from the same Enter the Dragon. And so this character arc is closing. Special Forces agent Sonya Blade has been played by British actress Elizabeth Malecki, who even decades later repeats her image. She also has a degree in ballet and contemporary dance and is a professional dancer and aerobics instructor, and her character was based on the image of the karate champion and film actress Cynthia Rothrock. The role of Kano was played by a rather cult actor and a real fan of the series, Italian-American Richard DeVizio. He was the only actor who appeared in probably all games of the Mortal Kombat series, while in the future, besides Kano, he would play a couple of other characters. They would all be hiding behind masks or makeup, so you wouldn't probably recognize them. And for filming in the first part, Kano's infrared implant was attached to Richard's face with spirit gum. This is, by the way, a pretty obvious reference to the Terminator. He is a martial artist with a 7-star praying mantis, Chinese kung fu, and wushu techniques. Interestingly, it was Ed Boon who voiced Scorpion in the game. As you might guess, Scorpion has always been his favorite character.
I'm not gonna say anything to the bike because it's okay.
Get over here!
So while Boon was voicing the character, it was Divizio who came up with the idea for the kunai throwing movement and the phrases "get over here" or "come here" to accompany it. This movement has become widely known in gaming and pop culture. This is probably why Richard Divizio has made several public appearances as Scorpion, despite never playing him in the Mortal Kombat series. By the way, he got a degree in computer graphic design from the American Academy of Art in Chicago, a graduate of which, John Tobias, was also one of the creators of the game. But let's move on. The Raiden character was portrayed by Carlos Pesina, the younger brother of the more famous Daniel Pesina, and was inspired by Lightning from Big Trouble in Little China. He received the name Raiden and his god status in honor of the Japanese god of thunder, Raijin. He is also called Raiden-sama. The particle sama is a suffix expressing respectful and polite treatment. Interestingly, Carlos also studied computer graphic design at the American Academy of Art. Probably all members of the team met Tobias there. Carlos had over 20 years of experience in many forms of kung fu, but has recently specialized in bagua, which would appear in the later parts of the game. Exploring different styles of martial arts has been one of Carlos's most important tasks while working with the game's animation team. After all, when his older brother left the project after the second part, Carlos became not only an actor but also a motion capture artist and animator. Today, he is an excellent motion capture specialist and has earned the nickname One Take for always recording moves in one take. At the same time, Daniel Pesina, who played the Hollywood movie star Johnny Cage, also played the immortal ninja Scorpion in the game. And when the developers came up with the idea of changing the yellow color of Scorpion's robes to blue in order to create his rival and killer Sub-Zero, he also performed it. To be honest, Mortal Kombat would become famous for this palette shift, which would continue to be used in later games as a technique for creating new characters. By the way, this same reptile was made green and also performed by Daniel Pesina. He had studied martial arts since the age of 10 and achieved black belt status in 3 different styles of martial arts. And being a good friend of John Tobias for many years, he was invited to work on a fighting game. Besides his acting duties, he was also the martial arts coordinator on the project. Later, he reprised his roles and added a couple more characters for the second part of Mortal Kombat. But being dissatisfied with the terms of the contract, Daniel Pesina, Ho Sung Pak, and other actors left the Mortal Kombat series. The situation that had developed in 1993 was rather unpleasant, but in order not to stretch the timing of this video, we will talk about it in the next one. In the meantime, it looks like it's time to talk.
Final round. Fight!
How do you feel about cutting his head off? After a $10 million advertising campaign, Mortal Kombat, debuting in home video today, is expected to sell 2 million copies at $50 a pop.
In 1992, devices with a new, still unknown game began to appear in various community center and arcade halls in Chicago. Even during the testing of the Mortal Kombat prototype, the developers, watching the players, noticed that a crowd of spectators always gathered around the device. Players didn't play, but watched others play, while there were many empty machines with other games nearby, including Street Fighter II. Of course, to the inexperienced eye, it seemed that the games Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat were the same as 2 drops of water. If you just put the games side by side, which happened in real life since their arcade machines were placed side by side in shopping malls, you could see the similarity between the 2 games. But in just one day, Mortal Kombat literally destroyed the success of Street Fighter II and built a crowd of players around itself, both children and adults. Anyone could flip a coin and take part in a deadly battle, even a 7-year-old for whom playing with such cruelty was a kind of taboo. Well, it should have been. After all, no one at that age admitted to their parents that they played Mortal Kombat, while all of them, at least, watched the older guys playing. The game screen had an aspect ratio of 4:3 and a resolution of 400 by 254 pixels. The first version of the arcade machine looked like a golden red cabinet with a picture of Johnny Cage decorated with dragon logos. Truth be told, at that time, Midway had not yet decided in which direction it should look. That's why the dragon on the logo looked either to the right or to the left, both on the device and in the game itself. This did not last long until the registration of the trademark by the company. Then, Midway decided that the dragon should face to the right, and since then, the official logo has always looked that way. In addition to the aforementioned 5-button control, the device also had 2 toggle switches that did not carry any additional special function. However, they were created to be able to turn off blood and fatalities in the game. Yes, it was because of Mortal Kombat that age restrictions appeared in all games. but more on that later. Of course, Mortal Kombat was not the first violent game in the world, and not the first to attract the attention of concerned adults and the media. It just managed to make it much more expressive and noticeable, due to the detailed images of the characters copied from real people. All but the four-armed half-human, half-dragon Goro, which Kurt Chiarelli created with doll modeling and stop-motion animation. And of course, the abundance of cruelty towards real people caused huge dissatisfaction in society.
Buttons, you do moves, and
And then what are you trying to get to? The fatality?
nah, there's a master guy you gotta beat at the end. Fatalities are just what happens if you're really brutal to your opponent. You get an opponent, you can rip off his head or something like that.
Sounds like a pretty thrilling game, and this is the kind of violence that critics are pretty worried about.
The game attracted a very wide audience of players, but the creators understood how thin the ice they were walking on was, and it seemed that initially they really thought to limit the brutality and make it possible to turn off fatalities on the gaming device. But a game without cruelty turned out to be of no interest to anyone, because Street Fighter already existed for this. The game had to compete, and that was one of the main elements of competition. The managers of the nationwide arcade chain tried to somehow clean up the game and censor it, so instead of tearing off the head at the end, the opponent simply disappeared off screen. Sales dropped by 40%, and players started complaining, "What have you done to the game? It has lost its fun." At the same time, the children did not consider the game particularly cruel and detrimental to society. According to them, television was much more dangerous than any game, and the game was still a game. So, the brutality switches on the machine turned out to be useless. But not only cruelty attracted players, many were interested in the opportunity to open and fight against a secret character. And in subsequent revisions of the game, Reptile began to appear before the battle and give a hint to the players how to fight him. Furthermore, the well-recreated Oriental style in the game was complemented by a simply gorgeous soundtrack and sound design by composer Dan Fortin. The computer, or in other words the bot, was not invincible, but required special efforts to win. The player had to know the character's combinations and be able to quickly press the necessary buttons. Therefore, sometimes the computer forced the player to sweat and bomb on the complexity and strength of their opponents. But you must not forget that arcade machines were designed to take money from users so that the player threw in one coin, and another coin, and another, and another, and another. Well, you understand. But still, most played with friends and learned to juggle the enemy. This mechanic hasn't been thought at all by the developers, but it still underlies the gameplay to this day. It was about carrying a series of blows that the enemy could not block and could be carried out by driving the character into a corner or interrupting his attack with a blow. And in a nod to Van Damme's Bloodsport, the game featured a Test Your Might mini-mode where the player had to adjust their punching power and smash through materials of varying strength. For this, the players received points, and at the end of the mode, he had to meet his shadow, more precisely his own character in a mirror match. But having defeated his own character, the player faced a more difficult task, sparring with two opponents at the same time. 3 fights to make sure that the player is worthy of the championship. The success and popularity of the game on arcade machines was enormous, and the developers began porting it to home consoles. Although the arcade version of Mortal Kombat was not originally localized in Japan, it was officially released there in 1992 by Taito, who organized the Midway North American game import. The launch of Mortal Kombat on home consoles by Acclaim Entertainment was one of the biggest video game launches of its era. TV commercials promised a simultaneous release of all 4 home versions of the game: SNES, Genesis, Game Boy, and Game Gear. The actors appeared on various TV shows as characters and talked about the game, attracting new players. Well, you probably saw this commercial where everyone was running to play the game as if it was Half-Life 3 and not an arcade fighting game. The day it happened, September 13th, 1993, was popularly nicknamed Mortal Monday. Plus, by that time, the aforementioned Mortal Kombat Collector's Edition comic has already been released, and it was actively advertised in the game with the possibility of ordering by mail. By the way, the Mortal Kombat scream itself, which sounds in the commercial, will become part of the cult soundtrack from the 1995 film adaptation 2 years later. It would be cut straight out of the commercial by the band, the Immortals, and they would use that music sample for their track. In addition to the Sega and Nintendo consoles, the game was also released on MS, DOS, and Amiga. The MS-DOS port was perhaps the closest to the original game, while the Amiga's one turned out to be strange. Not only did it take forever to load, but the console's gamepad had only 2 buttons. Who had an Amiga? Write in the comments how you played it. The studio even planned to make a port on the PC Engine and a brand new Atari Jaguar, but they were cancelled. Many players outside of America who hadn't played arcade games met Mortal Kombat on Sega, and the game never came out on NES/Famicom at all, and was ported only by pirates. The graphics on home consoles, of course, sank a little. The character models became smaller, but all the cruelty and bloodiness, and at the same time the funness of the game, remained the same level. Although initially in the version of the Sega CD and Sega Genesis, the blood was turned off and the fatalities were less violent. Before the start of the game, a kind of disclaimer was popping up on the screen, informing about ethics and a code of honor. At the same time, the disclaimer hinted that the game had a secret bloody code, and it really did. If the player entered the combination ABACAB on this screen, the letters turned blood red, then Scorpion screamed "Get over here" in the background, and the game announced that the battle was now beginning. Interestingly, the combination itself was not just a set of letters. This was a reference to the album of the same name by the English rock band Genesis. Well, quite logically, the Genesis console, the Genesis band, the code, and the album ABACAB, the game immediately became habitually cruel and had full-fledged fatalities. And the very idea of a secret code in the game would affect the entire world of computer video games in the future. The developers of many cult games would add secret codes to them, and not even one, but several. Even in the same Mortal Kombat, it was possible with the help of one code to open the secret game control menu. A cheat mod appeared on the Genesis if the player pressed down, up, left, left, A, right, down in the main menu. In fact, there were enough of these codes in the game. One was opened quite recently, only 29 years after the game's release. At the same time, Nintendo did not have any codes, and the game was simply devoid of any cruelty. There, even fatalities were simply called finishing moves. Well, what do you want from a company in which players need to jump on mushrooms and run through the green fields of Zelda? So, shortly thereafter, representatives of Sega and Nintendo in North America met at a hearing on video game violence and societal corruption, chaired by Senators Joseph Lieberman and Herb Kohl. As stated earlier, Mortal Kombat wasn't America's first violent game, but it was very violent. And this level of gore and realism had set a historical precedent. It was time to set boundaries for what was permitted. Hearings were held from the end of 1992 to 1993. At the meeting on December 9th, 1993, in addition to Mortal Kombat, there were other games like Night Trap, Doom, and Lethal Enforcers that were decided to assign age restrictions. Nintendo officials argued that the games were fun for kids and the whole family, that no 16+ or 18+ rating could be established. Sega, on the contrary, supported the initiative of age marking of game content. As a result of this hearing, it was decided to create a full-fledged association to determine the age rating for entertainment software and video games. The Entertainment Software Rating Board, abbreviated as ESRB, has existed since September 1994 and is still successfully operating. And with an eye to the time, it seems it was the right decision, which rather benefited the gaming industry than harmed it. The world of video games did not stand still, and sooner or later these age ratings would have appeared anyway. The popularity of the game is not even discussed. According to Replay in the United States, Mortal Kombat was the second most popular upright arcade cabinet in September 1992, and from October to November of that year, it headed Replay upright arcade cabinet charts. The game then repeated this success twice more in 1993 and also topped the Play Meter arcade chart. Mortal Kombat was the second highest grossing arcade game at the time, after NBA Jam. In November 1993, Acclaim announced that it had shipped over 3 million copies of Mortal Kombat for home systems, and they were all sold out in the first 3 weeks. The game sold well on Sega and was the most popular on that platform. By July 1994, more than 6 million copies of the cartridges had been sold worldwide, and the sales revenue was more than $300 million. Well, in terms of today, this figure would be twice as big. Developers quickly became millionaires. Almost immediately on the wave of success, the studio began developing a sequel, and until the mid-2000s, the first part of Mortal Kombat would go through more than one rebirth, become part of the premium version of Mortal Kombat Deception for PlayStation 2, and be released as bonus content for the original Xbox. It will also be part of the Midway Arcade Treasures Extended Play Collection. On August 31, 2011, Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment released the Mortal Kombat Arcade Collection, which would include the first 3 classic entries in the series for Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360. But that is a completely different story. The game will expand, grow into a full-fledged series, and go through many changes over its long 30-year journey. Soon after the success of the first part, a sequel will be released, developing the ideas of the original. But we'll discuss this in the next video of the rise and fall of the Mortal Kombat series. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see the next part, like this video and write about it in the comments so we will understand that you are really interested in knowing what awaited Ed Boon, John Tobias, and the already legendary Mortal Kombat. And that's all for today. You watched PressX. See you soon.